it was almost forceful the way you said tomato rather than tomato. I know that's probably hard for you, but you're right.
To me, it all comes down to one word: curiosity. Curiosity. You have kids, and I would guess that if you were to reflect back when they were younger, I know some of them are young, what is the number one word, if you were to do a cross-analysis of all your kids that they all have in common, what is the number one word that they ask Dad?
Why?
Exactly.
Yeah, because dads are supposed to have the answers, right? It's like,
Well, and it's
and they
mom
all
as
do
well.
like a 5 whys, you know, kind of analysis. But why? But why? But why?
Right.
And one time I figured out, my eldest daughter, she finally got to like the 6th why. And finally I figured out how to answer it, that she would just stop. And I come to the conclusion that the right way to answer that is because. And she'd be like, okay, good, I got it. And she'd like, leave it alone. I'd say, it's just because.
Yeah. And that's where we sometimes end up, right? Because my epiphany for me, if I were to, be so bold as to say there was some sort of enlightening moment in my life, was when I got to the 3 words. It was through the end of a relationship, which at the time was heartbreaking for me as a human, as the individual who'd gone through this loss of this person I loved. And unbeknownst to me, it was really just to be the catalyst to pull up the deeper fear of loss that had been established, obviously, when my parents died. And so she left, and for 5, 7, 8 weeks or whatever, I was struggling and calling friends and, doing whatever I could to try and get her back. And we spoke for a couple of weeks, but then there was about 6 weeks of no communication. And so my mind, my ego, my stories were just incessantly keeping me up at night, where it was like, where is she? Is she with someone else? Am I going to see her again? And all of that, right? The heartache that it is to...
How old were you at the time?
29. And so sort of Saturn return, which is, that sort of the flower that's going through the mill.
That was my first midlife crisis.
Yeah,
Yes. I remember it well.
That is everybody's, some pivotal moment usually in terms of astrology, sort of between the ages of 29 and 31 when Saturn returns. But anyway, so I was sitting there, and this is again now 6 weeks or so with incommunicado with her, and still these incessant questions of like, where is she? Is she dating someone else? Will I see her again? Will I have love like that again? And I got the answer to all questions simultaneously.
Which was?
I don't know.
Get comfortable with that.
Yeah, and it was freedom like I'd never experienced before, because it was the truth. And it was the part of me that was uncomfortable with not knowing that was always trying to figure it out, which is the paradox of being human, right? Is that life itself is the paradigm of uncertainty, but as humans, because we live in a space of survival, trying to make it, we don't feel safe, so we always want to know. And so there's that conflict that creates suffering. Yeah, it's very profound. So when I saw that, and this comes full circle to what I was saying about curiosity, is like, well, we don't know, but that's why it's so fun to try and find out.
Very true.
And that to me is consciousness wanting to know itself. And it can only know itself. Unity has no experience.
Yeah.
So unity has to be diversified in order to have any relativity. And I had this as another visceral experience, not only the experience of separation, but when I was in a rent-controlled apartment in Santa Monica, I barely had any cash to my name. And I was going for a run, and I was leaning up against the wall of this pretty atrocious rent-control apartment, but for some reason, whoever the painter was had done an immaculate job. So the portion of the wall I was close to, I was stretching my calves, was so uniformed, I actually got a little bit dizzy because there was no like scuff or raised paint or dirt. And so my eyes were unable to have any form of relativity. And at that moment, I realized, wow, like without relativity, there's not actually a cognitive experience. And so that just sort of played into what I was already starting to write about and philosophize about. It's like, oh, unless there is diversity, there's no relativity. If there's no relativity, there's no experience. And so curiosity to know oneself, I can't know myself as oneness because there's nothing to compare against. Yeah. And so this is why also in the realm of, being human in this dimension, what is the number one topic of conversations? Relationships.
Yeah.
Right, they are the greatest, I would assert, conduit for growth, right? Especially intimate relationships where you get sufficiently close to somebody.
It's almost like it's designed for that.
Yeah, seems that way.
It definitely seems that way, doesn't it? It's because it's never just as simple as, I like you, you like me, let's get together, and let's spend the rest of our lives in happy bliss. And
No.
No,
that
it's
part
not like
doesn't
that.
typically happen.
Yeah.
The movies will tell you.
No,
well,
people ask me all the time. They're like, Robert, you're a mathematician. How much is half of a half of a half of half? And I said, 3 marriages. Clearly.
You're in your third. I didn't know.
Yeah.
Okay, good for you.
Yeah.
The triumvirate, safety in numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe. But the point to that, I think, is that we experience, and I'm starting to realize this now too, the people that come into your life are there always to illuminate for you the areas where you're not free.
Hence my quote.
And so you will inevitably, I had a very interesting conversation with Zach Bush about this.
Yeah, love Zach.
And Zach said, he said something that I thought was like one of them, like literally I should have paid him $500,000 for this quote. Sorry, Zach. I did take him to Egypt.
I know, I'll take it on his.
That's right. So I said to him, like, so, what are your thoughts? Because I knew he had some sort of different ways of looking at relationships and monogamy and all this type of stuff. And I had overheard him in Egypt saying to someone, he's like, yeah. So they asked him, and he had a totally serious look on his face. And they said, so what are your thoughts on like monogamy and everything and polyamory and all of that? And he said, I believe in moment by moment monogamy. And I was like, whoa, this guy, he must be going to run for office someday, right? It's like, and then he told me he was planning to.
Yeah.
I had to pry more in that. I mean, come on, what do you mean by moment monogamy?
Yeah, yeah.
And his answer was actually quite fascinating because what he said was he realized that the world around him is essentially like this U inverse. And what shows up in your life is like, a goddess, a woman, in our case for men, or a god, who is there to illuminate for you what is not yet free.
Yeah.
And so therefore, as you're evolving, you can expect to have multiple relationships. And your identification and affiliation with what the nature of those relationships is going to inevitably evolve as well, because it's almost like, okay, I'm going to be with this wonderful person until I no longer judge negatively the thing that she's meant to illuminate for me.
Correct.
And that ride might be a long, long ride.
Yeah.
And relationship, or it might not be so long.
Right.
It's not, one is not less beautiful than the other.
Unless juxtaposed against the context that it should be a certain way, then you create suffering.
But that's part of the backdrop of the game, right? So let's make sure that everyone is conditioned to believe that it should be a certain way.
Yeah.
But maybe we just need to change the way we perceive the world, and that's when the world changes.
Yeah. And that's why, again, I have a very different take on what it is to be human, right? The real game for me is about liberation. It's not about amassing followers, money, having a family and kids, right? That's the human relative experience, which is all beautiful and have at it. But what is this dimension for, as far as I'm concerned, just Peter Crone's perspective is that we are here under the illusion that we're limited when we're not. And so the game is, how can you transcend these constraints with which you arrive to discover your own divine nature?
So true. I mean, that's what I believe. I believe that we are all the higher selves that have decided to experience life beyond the didactic through experiential learning. And the way that we achieve that is just as you said, we have to divide ourselves so that we can perceive ourselves and create the relativity.